He waved that stupid little flag. The one with the embroidered hawk. For Theodore. My dad. The flag itself was faded, the gold thread that outlined the hawk's wings dulled to a muddy brown. It was small, maybe a foot long, attached to a thin wooden dowel. The fabric felt rough under my gaze, like old, worn canvas. It smelled faintly of mothballs and something else, something sharp and almost metallic, like old pennies. You know how those things get. Packed away in a trunk for years, absorbing the scent of whatever else was shoved in there with it. My mom just stood there, arms crossed, looking like she was about to spontaneously combust. This woman. She'd been fuming for like an hour, ever since the news broke about the company. Theodore's company. The one he secretly owned the majority of. The air in the room was thick, almost chewy. It had that stagnant quality of a closed-up house on a humid day. Even though the air conditioning unit outside was making that weird grinding noise, like a dying robot. It had been doing that for weeks. I'd mentioned it to the landlord, this guy who always smelled faintly of old newspapers. And he'd just said, "It'll sort itself out." He said that about everything. My toilet was making a gurgling sound. It'll sort itself out. The light in the hallway flickered like a strobe. It'll sort itself out. I swear, that man had a whole philosophy built around inaction. Anyway. So yeah, they were all gathered at the house. My parents. My brother, who's always been a bit of a golden child, you know? Always had a knack for making everyone else feel less. He was wearing a shirt that was definitely too tight around the shoulders. It was a pale blue, almost the same shade as Aunt Carol's cardigan. Speaking of which, Aunt Carol. His wife. She was there too, looking like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. All of them expecting me to do something. To say something. But I just watched him wave the flag. It was a silly thing. A relic from some childhood camping trip. You know how it is. He'd probably found it in the attic, tucked away in a box labeled memories. I remember one time. Years ago, I was trying to explain a complex financial report to Theodore. He just nodded along, doodling little rocket ships on a napkin. I was so frustrated. Thought he wasn't listening. Turns out, he'd already figured out the whole thing, and my explanation was just a formality. He still had that hawk flag somewhere. I think. Probably still had the napkin too. My mom finally cracked. Her voice was a low growl, like a dog about to bite. Are you going to say something? I shrugged. What was there to say? He'd played them all. Every single one of them. Played them like a damn fiddle. They'd all been so busy patting themselves on the back for years, talking about how they helped Theodore build it. How their advice was crucial. How Theodore was such a visionary, but he needed their steady hands to guide him. Their business acumen. Their networking. Their everything. Turns out, the only thing he needed was to actually own the damn thing. All of it. He owned it. All of it. This woman, my aunt, she started fiddling with the loose thread on her cardigan. It was a pale blue. Hadn't noticed it before. The thread was thin, almost invisible at first. But as she pulled at it, it grew longer, like a worm emerging from its hole. She kept her eyes fixed on it, her fingers working it back and forth. The movement was repetitive, almost hypnotic. The cardigan itself looked expensive, the kind of material that whispers wealth, but that one loose thread was screaming neglect. Or maybe just a subtle rebellion. My brother just stared at the floor. His shoes were untied. He never did that. He was meticulous about his appearance, always. Even when he was a kid, he wouldn't go outside until his laces were perfectly knotted, two symmetrical bows. Now, they just dangled there, limp and forgotten. The leather of his shoes looked polished, a deep, rich brown. I could almost smell the shoe polish. Or maybe that was just the general smell of the house. Dust and old money and anxiety. My dad, Theodore, he finally lowered the flag. He looked at me. A tiny smirk. It wasn't a big smirk, more like a twitch of his lips, a fleeting acknowledgement. Then he walked inside. The screen door slammed shut behind him, a sharp, definitive sound that echoed in the sudden silence. This was supposed to be a big moment, right? A triumphant reveal. Everyone's proud. But it felt flat. Like a deflated balloon. Like a party where everyone forgot to bring the cake. There was a strange scent in the air, something like ozone. Mixed with the faint aroma of my dad's cologne, the one he always wore when he wanted to make an impression. It was a heavy, musky scent, designed to be remembered. But right now, it just felt old. Mom's face was a thundercloud. She muttered something about ingratitude. About never being appreciated. The whole 9 yards. You know the tune. It was a familiar song, one she'd been humming for years, especially when she felt overlooked. After all I've done. No one ever sees. If it weren't for me. It was a symphony of self-pity. And this woman, his wife, she just kept her eyes down. A little too much, maybe. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, not a strand out of place. She clutched her handbag like it was a life raft. I wondered if she'd known all along. Or if this was as much of a surprise to her as it was to everyone else. The way she avoided eye contact was something I'd always found interesting. She had a way of disappearing into the wallpaper, even when she was the center of attention. My dad. Theodore. He just poured himself a drink. Didn't even offer anyone else one. The clink of the ice cubes in the glass was loud in the quiet. He took a long sip, his eyes closed for a moment. Then he opened them and looked around, his gaze sweeping over us like a general surveying his troops. But there were no troops here. Just a collection of disappointed relatives and a man who'd just revealed his true hand. So yeah. That was it. Anyway. We stood there for a minute. Or maybe 5. Time gets a bit stretchy when you're trying not to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Or in this case, the hawk-waving patriarch who'd just dropped a bomb. My brother finally looked up. His gaze met mine for a split second, then darted away. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Resignation? Anger? Or maybe just the realization that his golden halo had a few tarnished spots. Mom finally let out a huff, a sound like air escaping a leaky tire. She turned and marched towards the kitchen. I could hear the clatter of dishes, the aggressive opening and closing of cupboards. A percussive accompaniment to her simmering rage. She never just left a room. She made an exit. Aunt Carol finally stopped fiddling with her cardigan. She smoothed it down, as if trying to erase the evidence of her distraction. She then looked at me, a polite, tight-lipped smile. Well, she said, her voice thin and reedy. That was certainly informative. I just nodded. Informative. That was one word for it. Other words that came to mind: manipulative, deceptive, brilliant, infuriating. My brother cleared his throat. I should probably head out, he mumbled, not looking at anyone. He shuffled towards the door, his untied shoelaces flapping with each step. He opened the door and stepped out into the oppressive heat of the afternoon. The screen door slamming shut behind him with less force than my dad's had. I watched him go. He didn't get into his car immediately. He stood on the porch for a moment, looking out at the street, his shoulders hunched. It was the kind of posture that screamed burdened. You know. Like the weight of the world was resting squarely on his perfectly tailored shoulders. Then, a thought popped into my head, entirely unrelated to the drama unfolding. I need to call the dentist. My back molar has been bothering me. A dull ache that comes and goes. I should probably get that checked out before it becomes a full-blown emergency. I'll make a note of it. Dentist. Call. Aunt Carol stood up, smoothing her skirt. I suppose I should be going as well. Theodore, dear, she called out, her voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. No answer. Well. I'll see myself out then. She paused at the door, looking back at the empty space where Theodore had been. Quite the day. And then it was just me and my mom in the living room. The air conditioner unit outside whined its mechanical death song. The silence was punctuated by the occasional clink from the kitchen, where Mom was engaged in her battle with the crockery. The smell of something cooking, probably something elaborate and passive-aggressive, started to waft into the living room. I walked over to the window. The grass in the yard was a little too long. It needed cutting. I'd meant to mention it to the landlord, but then again, he'd just say, "It'll sort itself out." Maybe he was right. Maybe the grass would just grow itself to a reasonable length. Or maybe a herd of wild lawnmowers would descend and take care of it. One could hope. Mom came back into the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face was still set in a hard mask, but there was a flicker of something else there now. Exhaustion, maybe. Or just the dull ache of prolonged disappointment. He always was a sly one, she said, her voice flat. It wasn't an accusation, more of a statement of fact. Like observing that the sky was blue or that water was wet. I nodded. Sly. Yes. He was definitely that. We all thought we knew him, she continued, her gaze fixed on some point beyond the wall. We all thought we understood. His genius. The word genius came out with a slight sneer, like it tasted bad. I walked over to the kitchen. The smell of onions and something savory was strong. Mom was stirring a pot on the stove. The rhythmic scraping of the spoon against the metal was the only sound, besides the dying robot outside. He never did like to share the spotlight, she said, not looking at me. I opened the pantry. It was packed with cans and boxes. I grabbed a loaf of bread. Or the credit, she added, a little louder this time. I took out a jar of peanut butter. The good stuff. The crunchy kind. Or the profits, apparently, she finished, her voice barely a whisper. I think I'm going to go make some toast. This whole thing has made me surprisingly hungry. Odd, really. Considering.